The Georgia Bulldogs at the Georgia 247 site, Dawgs247. Jordan, really appreciate a few minutes of your time this afternoon. Let's jump in with, I guess, what has become the biggest story of the week, and that's the health of Brock Bowers. What do we know in terms of what he has done so far this week and what you expect from him?
Yeah, it's sort of number 19 watch in Athens right now. We heard from Kirby on Tuesday that Brock was back running at practice. A little bit after we talked to Kirby, one of the receivers, Marcus Rosemary-Jack Saint, shared that he had heard that Brock had hit 19, 20 miles an hour on the GPS. I'm sure Kirby wasn't real thrilled that he decided to share that with the media. But, yeah, I think all the anticipation for this game, outside of the fact that it's a top 10 game and it's going to go a long way in deciding who plays in Atlanta, is on the Georgia side if Brock Bowers can come back. Just based on what I've heard right now, I do think he'll suit up on Saturday. It's just going to be a question of if he's going to be able to play, how he has navigated this week, getting back running, if he is ready to go. But I do think he'll be in uniform, and it's going to be up to how he's feeling on Saturday. And even if he does play, I have to imagine they're going to be really smart about how much they play him, maybe 10, 15 snaps, try to get him back into form after missing the last two games.
How much does it matter that this is Georgia's last home game and likely his last time to suit up inside Sanford Stadium?
Well, I'm sure that there is an emotional part of that he wants to finish things off in Athens on a high note. But I do think everyone involved is going to be very smart about this. Brock is most likely going to be a first-round pick, and depending on the value of tight end, maybe he's a top 10 pick. So I don't think they're going to push the issue just for, sort of how he feels and how much he wants to be back there, because, it sounds like if it was up to him, he would have been practicing very soon after that surgery. That's just the kind of guy he is. It's not necessarily a surprise. But, yeah, I'm sure that there's an emotional piece to this. But I think the people making the decisions, Kirby Smart, head trainer Ron Corson, and really the entire Georgia staff, I think they're going to be smart about whether they play him or not, and if he does play, what kind of workload he gets.
So, Jordan, I've been to Athens a few times for a football game when Ole Miss was playing, and I always got the impression that the potential for an electric atmosphere was there. But it was like that was kind of saved for an Auburn game, or if LSU was coming to town, or it happened to be an Alabama game. It never felt like Ole Miss got that much juice. And that was back when Ole Miss and Georgia played almost every year. Given the stakes this week, that it's a top 10 matchup and it's at night, is this Georgia's first night game of the season?
No, they've played a few earlier in the year. Last year they didn't have any night games. But, looking at this game and as far as the crowd, I do think you're going to see them factor into this one. I think Kirby Smart was really smart in interviews to start the week, really pushing for the crowd to be loud. There were a lot of people who kind of took issue with how the crowd really wasn't a factor last week against Missouri. I think there was a couple times that kind of got loud, but definitely made things easier on Missouri than they could have. And, Georgia gets some flack sometimes when it comes to crowd noise. Some of it is sort of kind of boils down to the architecture of Sanford Stadium. You got one end of the end zone that's completely open. It kind of loses some noise, but that's not to say it can't get loud. I think the Tennessee game last year, when Tennessee came in as the number one team in the college football playoff ranking, that's the loudest I've ever heard Sanford Stadium. I know a lot of people also point to the Notre Dame game a few years ago when they came to Athens as being super loud. So I do think that they have to be motivated to get there and really play a role in this. And I think given the stakes, and like I said, given the fact that Kirby Smart kind of called on the fans to do something, do their part, that should be motivational in a night game with a whole lot of stakes.
Jordan, I did an interview yesterday and was asked if there was an area on the field where I thought Ole Miss had an advantage against Georgia. I'm curious your take on that. When you look at these two rosters and you kind of compare position groups, is there an area that you think Ole Miss may be better than Georgia?
The one that immediately stands out to me is running back, and part of that is that Georgia has been pretty banged up there, but they've kind of gotten it figured out with Dejon Edwards and Kendall Milton. But I think you've got to give a lot of credit to Quinshon Judkins and also Ulysses Bentley. I think they've both done a very, very good job this year. Other than that, and I'll be honest, not having a total grasp of what their roster has been able to do, it's easy for me to say, well, Georgia has continued to recruit top three classes year after year. I tend to give them the edge. But running back is where it kind of stands out to me, just with what Judkins is able to do. Georgia just kind of grinds out yardage, and you haven't had a ton of big games from their backs this year. I mean, Dejon Edwards has been the top back, and he's had a few really big games. I think about the South Carolina game early in the year. But off the top of my head, I'd give Ole Miss the edge at running back among the positions.
Yeah, I agree with that. I think that's probably the only position group on the field that I would point to where that's the case. I might do it at quarterback also. I know Carson Beck's been really, really good. I think the veteran element for Jackson Dart is something. Their numbers are really similar. Tell us a little bit more about Carson Beck, because I feel like in a lot of ways he's kind of flown under the radar this year as a first-year starter, but he's been really good.
Yeah, I think he's lived up to the coach's expectations, and it's sort of funny listening to Kirby Smart when he's asked about, what have you learned about Carson Beck? What have you seen through 9 games? And Kirby a lot of the time has just said, I haven't really learned anything. We knew he was capable of this. It just essentially wasn't his time to start, with Stetson Bennett, what he brought to the offense. I think Carson deserves a lot of credit for how he's taken over this team. I thought you could kind of tell there were nerves in that season opener against UT Martin, which I think is totally natural. And you consider the fact that he hadn't started a game since he was in high school back in 2019. But I think you've seen him really come into his own. He's done a very good job for the better part of this entire season of, hitting different receivers, not relying on just one guy. And that's been really crucial in these last 2 games without Brock Bowers out there. He's done a very good job last week against Missouri. Kind of saw him be more willing to take off and run. Had a big third down conversion when he saw he had a lot of room to run. He just took off. He's done a really good job, also done a good job taking care of the football. And I don't think you could really have asked any more of him compared to what he's actually accomplished at this point in the season.
Is there much thought about Carson Beck kind of being one and done and making himself available for the draft? I mean, size-wise, it's kind of prototypical for the NFL, 6'4", 220. He's got the big arm, moves a little better. Is that position's kind of changing at the next level, or do you think he's back in red and black next year?
I think it's going to be a conversation. I actually saw before we got on the show that ESPN's latest mock draft has him as the number 5 quarterback. So, it's going to be a decision he has to make. The quarterback room next year has the potential to be pretty loaded. You've got 2 guys in this upcoming class, including Dylan Raiola. Brock Vandagriff is still on this team. He's the guy that pushed Carson Beck the hardest to win that job this spring. And Gunnar Stockton's the guy that's younger than those 2 guys, is also super talented. So I think it's a decision he's going to have to make. I think he's got the capability to go ahead and go pro. I don't know how high he would go, maybe 3rd round, something like that. But I think Georgia would very much welcome him back if he decided to come back in 2024, and would definitely have a chance to build on what's been a really strong first year as a starter.
Last thing for you, pretty significant injury on the defensive side last week with Jamin Dumas-Johnson with the broken forearm. How big of an effect is that on what Georgia does defensively? And I know, going back to your point earlier, they've recruited well, good players all over the field, but he was a really good one.
Yeah, and Jamon had really been playing his best ball, I thought, of this season and probably the last 2 or 3 games. Shame that he got hurt at the end of the third quarter against Missouri. It kind of adds to what we were talking about a few minutes ago with the running backs. That's sort of my key to this game, is can they slow down Quinshon Judkins, because Jamon was outstanding against the run. And you've got Smile Munden, who is a junior like Jamon. He's going to be counted on to do quite a bit. And then besides Smile, you're probably leaning on 2 true freshmen, C.J. Allen and Raylan Wilson. Now, these 2 guys were 2 of the top linebackers in the country in this most recent class. But that's a lot to ask of some young guys who kind of had trial by fire when they've been out there. There's been mistakes and there's been miscues along the way. So you're really looking at those two true freshmen. Then Xavier Story, who's a former 5-star, also he's actually a redshirt sophomore, but he hasn't really played a ton. Missed last week's game due to personal reasons. So there's definitely a question at linebacker besides Smile Munden. Those guys are very talented, but they're going to be taking on a much bigger role with Jamon unavailable.
A lot of build up to this one. We'll see if it lives up to the hype on Saturday night. Jordan, thanks so much for your time. Great.